Okay, we're back on, and we were talking about casting and characters, and I want to move on to Ambassador Delenn, played by Mira Furlan.
For Delenn, I needed someone who, again, had a certain weight and strength to her. And Mira has actually been one of the preeminent actors in the former Yugoslavia who took a moral stand when the country began to split up. Actors and performers were prohibited from going from one region to the next because they were fighting each other. And she and her husband, Goran, refused to acknowledge those borders, and they continued to act across areas they shouldn't have been traveling to, and were forced to flee the country for their lives. And when I heard that story and that she had taken a moral stand like that, that was one of the reasons I felt we have to hire her, because Delenn needs to have a moral center to her. And she had that strong accent, which really we hadn't much thought about in terms of the character having, but it makes sense that you would not have all the characters sound like Americans. So we felt that's a perfect hire for us, so we pulled her on.
What about the character of Delenn?
Delenn is the voice of higher reason. It's the voice that is aware of the fact that we are star stuff, that we come from the star, the hearts of stars, that our atoms are the same ones that were birthed in the universe. And I wanted to give her that point of view, and also to use her to explore how you make reparations to a race after you've been at war with them, and to take her to the next level of making her partially human, to show, the process of understanding someone else's point of view by sort of coming around to their side of things. So bringing her from being an ambassador to a love interest to ultimately running the Interstellar Alliance was a good arc for her to travel, to give her that real strength and gravitas down the road.
Was that in the original plan?
Yeah. Her arc was there. Lando, Jakar, all their arcs were there. It was the only way the Sinclair one that changed the most. And the arc for Lita got changed because we had to bring someone else in as a telepath for the first 2 seasons, but then we moved off that person, brought her back in again as Pat Tolman, and we could pick up that arc again.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about her in a second. I want to stay on a little bit on Delenn and also the Minbari and creating the whole race.
Yeah, for the Minbari, I wanted almost kind of a Asian sensibility, but I combined it with the medieval part of, if you look at medieval social structure, they were broken down into priests, peasants, and military. That was pretty much the 3 castes you had to work with. So when I created the Minbari, I put that in there. That there's the warrior caste, the worker caste, and the religious caste. On the theory that whenever I wanted to look really, really alien, I would look to us and just take what was human and make it more upfront. Example being, there's a Lando refers to a guard stationed outside the Centauri Palace who's been guarding this empty space, no one knows why, for hundreds of years, and they discover that, well, no, the Centauri princess saw the first rose of spring coming through the snow, assigned a guard to it, and never revoked the order. So hundreds of years later, there's someone still standing there. And that comes from actually a true story that the Tsars, when the Tsarinas saw the first rose of spring coming through the snow and put a guard over it, never rescinded the order, and that persisted there in various incarnations for the next 100 years. So whenever I tried and make someone feel alien, I just looked at our own humanity and based it off of that. So in trying to make the Minbari seem alien, I just borrowed from our own medieval background. Even to the beds. The beds are based on English beds of the period. If you go to Shakespeare's house in Stratford upon Avon, you will find that the beds are very short and angled upward. People used to sleep sitting up because it was bad luck to lie down flat, because that's how people were dead. You were flat. So they sat sitting up. They slept sitting up. So I put that also in the Minbari culture.
What about the look of the Minbari?
That changed a lot over time, but I wanted it again to look very elegant. The bald headpiece, but the bone that kind of grew out behind it looked very elegant to me, and looked very thoughtful, and which is what they are. They're a very thoughtful race.
Is it true that Delenn initially was given more masculine features and that the change would have been to a woman?
The plan initially was to play Delenn as male, but with a woman playing the part. because that also would add a certain element of the alien to it. Why is this person who was a guy acting in ways that we associate with as a woman? Because no way could she lose all of that to try and play a male. Certain parts of that would have to come out. And I wanted to have the character then change gender. When she goes to the Chrysalis into the first season, she would also have changed gender to female, and then had the love interest with Sheridan, which would have been a real first for television. But as we tried to play with the voice to make that work, it just didn't work. The technology to make her voice sound male, given her accent, made it impossible to understand. So as we shot the pilot, we realized this is not going to work. We have to change all the looping, the pronouns from he to she, and just keep her as a female, because it didn't work. And I was so annoyed that we couldn't make that work.
Let's talk about Peter Jurasik as Lando Malari.
Peter Jurasik as Lando, again, came to the rehearsal, the audition, I should say, with that accent already in place. He's the first person who thought to bring in that kind of an accent. And I loved it. I thought it was terrific. And I said, and he had that vulnerable, beaten down, but somehow nonetheless stubborn resilience that the Centauri have. And another case, oddly enough, he and Andreas Katsoulis came to the same audition the same day, and both got cast in their own parts that day. So it was interesting. Ever since day one, they were sort of linked together.
For instance, how did Peter know that that's the part he should be reading for? I mean, how was...
Peter's agent sent him the script, and it was the one part that he was like most suited toward. And he does all kinds of pilots. He assumed it wasn't going to go anywhere anyway, so he had no problem auditioning for it. But I knew his work from Hill Street Blues and was a big fan of his work. So I thought, we have this actor, let's grab him. He really has all the attributes that Lando would have to have.
Talk about Lando himself.
Lando's arc is probably one of the most interesting of the entire show. If anything, it's almost the story of Lando and G'Kar, and that dynamic. Lando starts out as a buffoon. He starts as a clown, as a drunkard, a philanderer, a gambler. A guy who believes that somehow, somewhere, the future he was supposed to get didn't happen, that his people have become a joke, open 9 to 5 Earth time. I think it's like a museum. And he is sullen and resentful and wants it all back. And thus, when the opportunity comes to bring that back, to restore his people to their rightful position in the galaxy, he takes it and begins making a devil's bargain that gives him everything he wants, but not in the way that he wanted it. That's a great line he has where he says, I started out with no power and all the choices in the world. Now I have all the power I could ever want and no choices at all. And that relationship between himself and G'Kar, who saw off as bitter enemies and end up as friends, is probably the strongest arc of the entire show. It's not just from the writing point of view, but also from the performance point of view. It is so powerful, and they do such a good job of it. When in the 5th season, when G'Kar says to Lando, after having been brutalized by their race for over 100 years, says, my people can never forgive your people for what they've done, but I can forgive you. I was on set for that scene, and people were just in tears looking onto that. And it was a really powerful moment for those two characters to finally come to. So that transition is really the spine of the show.
Yeah. Andreas Katsoulis is G'Kar.
Andreas comes to us from a lot of work in Europe. He was this huge, powerful actor of Greek descent who actually enjoyed the mask. A lot of actors, when they put on that much prosthetic and their face disappears, they get very insecure about it. For him, it was liberating. He felt as G'Kar that he was sexy, that he was appealing. And he would stay in it all day long. He would be out in the parking lot smoking a cigarette as G'Kar. And it was true. Women actually responded to him. They would come over to him. They'd want to pose to him and touch him and stuff. As himself, it never happened. So he just dug on the fact that he was really attractive and sleek and sexy as G'Kar. And it was a liberating thing for him, which helped Mira, because Mira had a real problem at first with the prosthetics. Where am I in this? He said, no, it's the mask. It's the Greek mask in Greek theater. It frees you. You can be whatever you want to be. And brought such a power to that role. And when he showed up for the audition, he just projected that presence into the room. And I said, send the rest of them home. It's him. There's no question about it.
And the character of Jakar?
Again, as with Londo, we see a real arc. He starts off as the ambassador, but also a warrior who has been living under tyranny for a long time and really wants to kill his oppressor. That's his main goal, is kill those who killed us. Which is why when our character, who is our devil character in a sense, Morden, is trying to find someone to work with him, and Londo wants his empire back, which makes him perfect. All Jakar wants is to be free. And that character arc takes him toward religious enlightenment, toward a more peaceful point of view. So he goes from this really, what people assume was the villain of the show, a mean, bad, murderous guy, to a prophet, to a religious character who says no, violence is not the solution. And he's grown beyond that, and we must, as a people, grow beyond that, or we're never going to get anywhere. And that's again, that transition, that growth, was something you never saw before in a science fiction show, and we really wanted to emphasize that. Yeah.
And what about creating the Narn people?
The Narn are kind of lagging behind Jakar in enlightenment. They're like any beaten, conquered people. They are based on resentment and anger and self-destruction to a certain extent. And they come from a very arid planet. They're like any conquered race. They're fueled by rage, and which is great for the first part of the show for Jakar. But then when he begins to turn, they can't turn with him, and he ends up ultimately having to leave them behind. And so I'm going off on my own because you either want to destroy me or make me your leader, and I want to be either one of those. I'm going to go off on my own. And when you're ready for me to come back, you let me know.
What about the look of the characters?
The look of the characters was, we tried to make our prosthetics as interesting as we possibly could. The tradition was, like in Star Trek, they give them a funny forehead. We went for full body and full face prosthetics. And my thought was it come from a marsupial background that has some resemblance to American, to Earth lizards kind of thing. And so we created a full body cast for him, full face cast, the contact lenses. It was a pretty elaborate look, and that kind of ruddy desert environment you see throughout his quarters and his wardrobe and the planet itself. It's all kind of a piece.
Okay. Walter Koenig is Alfred Bester?
Walter was somebody I knew for a long time and wanted to give him a role that would show him as being something other than Chekhov. And his portrayal of Bester was probably his best work, and he will say as much, because it let him play a bad guy with a real sense of style and panache. So that was a great gift to him, and he was a great gift to us in playing that role. I should mention also that Andreas is also the second member of our cast to pass away. Like Jakar, though, his personality made all the difference in how that happened. He had reached this enlightened point. I was talking to Walter, that's how it came to mind just now. I came back to LA, got off a plane, and Walter called and said, "Have you heard about Andreas?" And I said, "What?" He said, "He's dying. He has lung cancer." And I said, "What?" He said, "Call him." I called Andreas, and he was laughing on the phone. He says, "Yeah, I'm dying." I mentioned all the stupid things, all this macrobiotics, and the hell that's ever been, and I'm dying. Because he had stage 4 lung cancer, which they didn't know he had because it was hiding behind his sternum. And Andreas showed me how to die, in the sense that he came at it from a point of peace and equanimity. And not long before he passed, he invited myself and Doug Netter and Peter Jurczyk to dinner at his house. And it was laughter and carrying on. He said, "Tell me all the scandals I never knew. Tell me all the stuff you never told the rest of the cast, because who am I going to tell?" Yeah. And we told him everything. And on the way out the door, he stopped each one of us and looked and shook our hands, and I knew it was the last time I was going to be seeing him. And sure enough, a month or two later, he passed away. He was, up the medicine that he was on and walked out. And he checked out early, on his own terms. And what amazing courage. To face that black, implacable wall of death with that kind of equanimity and courage and compassion, that's the way to do it. Yeah. So that was the second one of our cast to pass away. We've had a lot of people pass away from the show, including Jeff Conaway. And it seems profoundly unfair for a cast as talented just to be knocked down that efficiently.
Yeah, we were talking about Bester, so
yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the character?
That was, Bester is a member of the Psi Corps. My thought was, if you have as your conceit that there are telepaths among us, if the world discovers that, how would they respond? Naturally, Congress would be in the next day legislating about this and making rules of how you can use it, how you can't use it. There would be commercial telepaths and government telepaths. There would be telepaths and anti-telepaths. And they'd be put into an organization where they can be controlled and regulated. And Bester works for the Psi Corps, that organization. And he is a star of his own story. He believes that he's the good guy. He's fighting for his people, which is why we did an entire episode from his point of view, as if it was his show, and the Babylon 5 guys are the pain in the ass, and he's protecting his own kind. So I think we're all the star of our own narrative, all the heroes of our own story. So from his point of view, he's a righteous guy. And having a person who's there not because he's doing bad things and thinks he's doing bad things, but he thinks he's doing the right thing for his people, makes it kind of interesting. The monster never sees the monster in the mirror.
Yeah. Jeff Conaway is Zach Allen.
Jeff came to us after we were up and running, and I was surprised that he was going to be available. And I needed someone who, again, was the average guy, and Jeff really gave that to us. He was a hardworking cast member, came in every day, always dropping off vitamins on my desk because he thought I was working myself into an early grave. And we again played with his character in the course of the show, so when Night Watch, this sort of totalitarian group comes up, he is recruited by them to start spying on his own people, which again presages the Patriot Act and what's going on with that. And has this love affair with Lita that is unconsummated. As I say in the show, all love is unrequited. And the best thing he ever did was also the shortest thing in some respects. We were shooting one of the B5 TV movies, and they came in to say toward the last couple of days of shooting, we are short. The acting's going really well, and we're about a minute and a half short. You write something really quickly to fill up a minute and a half. And what do we have to work with? We only have Jeff, and we have Pat Tallman, and we have 2 sets left, the elevator and this. And okay, what can I do? I knew that Lita's character at that point had been possessed and taken over by an alien consciousness. So wouldn't it be fun if he gets in the elevator with her, and she's not even aware if he's there because she's, again, someone else is running her body. And he begins professing his love for her and how he wants to take care of her and look after her, and she doesn't respond to any of this. He thinks that she is rejecting him, and then starts apologizing for himself and saying, I didn't mean it, and we're going to work together. And it was this whole long arc of optimistic, I love this person, I love you, let's work together, oh crap, I've gone too far, let's never talk about this again. It's a minute and a half monologue. And he memorized it the day before. He got the pages that evening. The next day he showed up and just nailed it in one take. And we pretty much parked the camera and just let him go. And it's funny, it's sad, it's moving all at the same time. And he just nailed it. And we just loved that scene. The best actually scene from all the movies we did.
That's cool. You mentioned Pat Tallman as Lita Alexander. Talk a little bit about her.
I knew of Pat Tallman's work from Night of the Living Dead. I'm a huge zombie fan. And I'd seen that movie dozens of times and was struck by her strength. She was also a stunt woman, so she knew how to be very physical as well as how to act. And I needed someone in the role of Lita who could be, again, strong, vital, attractive, could act, but also could get into a fight when she needed to. And that was one of the very first roles I knew for sure who I wanted. To the point where when I had her come in to audition, I kind of adjusted the part for her, knowing her work from Night of the Living Dead. So she's waiting out in the room to come in for the audition. I come out and I say, hi, my name is Straczynski. I wrote this part for you. Good luck. Back in. And it scared the crap out of her in so doing. but so she got the part and did the pilot for us. And when we went to go from pilot to series, she had gotten some bad advice from her manager. Warner's was kind of circling around other people they wanted to do in the role, or looking for her to say anything at all to justify breaking off negotiations. There was a miscue and back and forth, and all of a sudden she passed and they moved on. And I was never happy about that. I thought she was the person I wanted in that place, in that story. So we brought on someone else to play the role of the telepath, but down the road she wanted to do other things. So I said, bring back Pat. I want her back in the show, and we brought her back in again.
And talk about the character of Lita.
Lita is a commercial telepath. Starts out that way anyway. Corporations hire telepaths to read the minds of competitors or to block their own minds from being read. And through her eyes, we get to see the functioning of the Psi Corps. In the pilot, she is called upon to enter the mind of Ambassador Kosh, one of our aliens, who is the least human of any of them, and is changed by that. And over the course of the show, she begins working more with Ambassador Kosh and becomes more empowered by the Vorlons and adjusted by them, and ends up being basically a nuclear bomb in human form, which is a really kind of a cool arc to go on.
Talk about Kosh. What does Kosh represent?
Looking at human religion, I wanted to sort of take the notion that God is whatever you happen to believe it is, and that his species have been sort of tinkering with humans for a long time, and so we see them as, that we've been programmed to see them, as other races see them in their own particular ways. What's at the core of the show on a thematic level goes back to the name of the show. Babylonian creation myth stipulates that we were brought into existence by the conflict between order and chaos. And that struggle, which never ends, forms everything around us. So I came up with the notion, we have these two alien civilizations, the Shadows and the Vorlons. Shadows are all about chaos, about getting groups to fight each other because the strongest will survive and will lead to the strengthening of all the different races. The Vorlons are all about order. Clean up your room, play nice, do what you're told to do. And these two competing philosophies have been at the core of a struggle that's been going on for millions of years between these two races on the smaller races, the younger races, us, the hobbits. And so I wanted to sort of bring that conflict to the foreground and put B5 in the middle of this big fight. So that the first thing we have to resolve is that huge, interstellar war based on order versus chaos. Then we have to get to the whole Earth Civil War storyline. So there's two big, huge wars that sort of form the arc and the spine of our story.
What about Lorien? What was Lorien?
Lorien's a cipher. Lorien, less say about Lorien, the better off for the character.
But you have a very, very concrete...
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Will you ever talk about it? Ever?
No.
Okay. And why were there 5 Babylons as opposed to, any other number? Was that significant for you?
I like the idea that they tried to build earlier iterations of the station. It was sabotaged, it was destroyed, one completely vanished, and that the last one that they were working on before, Babylon 4, was a really expensive one, all the really cool bells and whistles. And so therefore Babylon 5 is this kind of slapped together from spare parts, cheap operation, and the last stab at trying to make a diplomatic outpost like this.
And was the title always going to be Babylon 5?
Always. That was always the title, up to the point where I was working on Captain Power, which when I first came up with the idea, I slipped in a reference to the Babylon 5 station in Captain Power, so it was always Babylon 5.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the Rim. What is the Rim?
The Rim is the edge of known space. It is as far as humans have gone, and we sort of peer beyond that, like a bird peering out of the bars of its cage at the unknown. So it's as far as anyone has ever gone.
Let's talk a little bit about going back to the show. What were the demographics? Who was your audience?
We found our demographics are pretty varied. We were watched by whole families, from older folks to kids. It was it it was a pretty broad demographic. Where was surprised. I mean, a lot of the core was 20s to 30s men, but of the other groups, we did really, really well. So we had a pretty broad demographic.
And the internet was just really starting up at that point, 91. Can you talk about how you really use the internet to communicate with your fans, how they communicate with you, and what kind of influences that had on what you were doing?
I don't change my way of life very easily or very often. I've been online as much as one could be online at that time, in the early 90s, prior to Babylon 5. And when the show started, I thought, well, I can either change my behavior and get offline, or take advantage of this to stay online to communicate with the fans, and in so doing, demystify television production. Because I thought, and still feel, that as an audience, we cannot get what we want unless we understand the process and why decisions are made and why shows are made the way that they're made, which is why this kind of documentary is important to help to underscore that kind of situation. So I started a dialogue day in and day out to report on the making of the show and answer questions. I was the first producer to go online and do this and have that kind of dialogue. And we created a document that is hundreds of thousands of messages long. Apparently I had way too much free time on my hands. And has been used by other producers, by academics, master's theses and doctoral theses written about that stuff. And we created a document on the day-to-day making of a show, which engaged the fans in ways that they had never had the opportunity to be involved before. So, yeah, it was a great deal of fun to be able to talk to them on a daily basis, and occasionally scary, but mostly for the good. Yeah.
What kind of things did they ask you?
Everything from what's the overall story, what's it all about, what's the history of the characters. Fortunately, I knew all the background and history of all these different races, so I could spell it out. How were the effects being done? How are the prosthetics being done? Basically, the day-to-day minutiae of how do you make a show. So it really informed them, why did you do this in the story? Why did this get changed? Well, here's why, and help them understand the process. Because again, to me, it's all about process.
Did that also inform you in terms of your writing?
No, I could not allow that, because the problem is that the internet is great, but it's the world's biggest focus group. And the moment you let a focus group of any kind determine for you what you're going to do, you're screwed as a writer. So it never affected the writing. I never allowed it to affect the writing. The only time it ever came close was a guy online made a story suggestion that I was already planning to do, but if I would do this now, he could sue me for using his idea. It happens. And I stopped that story until he signed a document confirming that I had this idea first, and I could go ahead and make the episode. But no, I wouldn't let it affect the story at all.
Do you still use the internet for your current projects in that same way?
Now it's become trendy. Now everyone does it, and therefore I do it less. I always go against the tide. So I'm there. I have a presence online, but not as much as I used to.
And so let's talk a little about the network. In terms of censorship, was there any kind of censorship? Did they let you do what you wanted?
Leaving aside the obvious things like language and nudity, they left us alone in terms of censorship pretty much across the board. There was an episode where we show Londo cheating at cards. An appendage comes out from under here, goes onto the table, grabs the card, pulls it back, and he now has the cards he needs. And we make it pretty clear these are his genitalia. And Warner's called when they got the script and said, anywhere else you could never, ever do that episode, but go with God. So they let us do it. And we really had very little in the way of censorship at all, particularly after the second episode of year 2, because they were busy doing other things at the network. So that benign neglect let us do pretty much whatever we wanted to do. So I can't recall any cases at all where they said, you can't do that. Leaving aside the obvious things about sex and nudity and that kind of thing.
Was there anything to I know there were a lot of internet comments about Susan and Talia. What was the story with that?
What I wanted to do before the actress decided to leave the show was to develop slowly a relationship between our two female leads, Talia and Ivanova, to show the first, gay or bisexual relationship in television. And we kind of had to hasten that when the actress decided she wanted to go, and it wasn't played out as well as I might have wanted it to go. But yeah, I wanted that to, again, to be the first of its kind. And when I first broached the subject to the actresses, to Claudia and the other actress, I said, I'm very shy in many ways. I'm kind of sheepish. And when I went them on the set, I said, would you two be okay, playing like you were like doing involved kind of thing? And Claudia said, I mean like this, and they began making out on the set. And all work stopped immediately. I turned apparently bright red. And it's, yeah, like that. And I ran back to my office. So, yeah, that was always the intent, but we didn't get to play it out to full length.
Okay, and you didn't want to do it with another character later?
It would seem to me to be too obviously a replacement.
Do you have a favorite episode of the series? Not Shattered. Can't think of the name of the episode. Well, for me, probably on an emotional level, my favorite is the last episode, which I also directed, Sleeping in Light, because that's the one that drives everyone to tears consistently, for the right reasons for a change. And it's the one where you really feel the whole story arc has come to land finally, and you see where all the pieces are. So probably the very last episode is probably the strongest, I think, in that respect. Is but you shot it in season 4? Is that the one?
Yeah.
You shot? Okay. Can you talk about that?
We weren't sure if we were going to get a fifth year or not. We actually were told we weren't getting a fifth year. We were told, wrap it up, 4 years, you're done. And so we shot that episode, and TNT stepped in to do our 5th season, and I filed it away. I didn't even finish it. I didn't want Warner's to have their hands on it until it was ready to actually air, and then I gave it to them in finished form.
Were you happy with the way it came out? Is that what you really pictured?
When I first sat down to make those notes about Babylon 5, that episode was in my head, right down to every scene, and I knew how I wanted that to go. And I got to finally write that episode and direct it and see it brought to life, and it was everything it had to be. It was.
And you also appeared in it.
Yeah, it's a really big cameo and kind of dopey looking. The guy who turns off the lights, because I turned that station on. By God, I was going to turn it off.
That's great. So as you were going into, so you really wanted to, for the season 5 then, was that also your intent when you were first starting in terms of the storylines and the arcs, or did you have to kind of modify it in order to end the story in season 4?
When we were told to end the show in season 4, I knew that there were certain things that I planned to do in year 5 that I had to bring forward. I was going to prolong the Earth Civil War resolution to episode 4 of season 5. And season 4 would have ended on Sheridan captured and being interrogated. And that would let us have a strong entry to season 5. And the last part would be the denouement, seeing what happened to the Centauri Republic and all the rest of it. But when we had to wrap it up, everything sort of stopped. And I had to sort of reignite the motion in inertia in season 5. Plus, Claudia Christian left the show. And I also had now to introduce another character as suddenly our second in command. So season 5 is a very flawed creature in that respect. And I wish it had been better. I think the second half is pretty solid. The first half is kind of not great.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about Claudia Christian's leaving and Tracy Scoggins coming in?
When we thought we might get renewed for a 5th season, everyone signed a contract extension except Claudia, which we didn't know until the last minute when we were going to England. But she said, don't worry about it, I'll stay on the show. And while we were in England for a convention, a story broke in Variety. Her manager said, my client is not attached to the show anymore, and she's a free agent, which is news to us. And we said, what the hell? I said, well, I want to do other projects, and I want, my contract to say I'm only going to be paid, I'll only be in X number of episodes of paid for all 22. So we can agree to that, but we can't put it in writing, because if we do so, it's a de facto per episode contract salary raise, and that violates our deals with the other actors. You're all under the same terms. So we can't do that. And she said, well, then I'm not going to come back to the show, and left. And so we moved on, and we hired Tracy Scoggins. And it's about a month or so into that process of then writing the episodes for Tracy that Claudia's managers called up and said, well, are you ready to negotiate now? And it's, we're moved on. We're done. The downside was that Claudia said for many, next year or so, I was fired from the show. Joe fired me, which is not true. And I got death threats. There were, fanatic fans who were really upset with me. Finally, like 2 years later, she said, well, yeah, I left over money issues. Like, well, where were you 2 years ago? Yeah. So that was kind of unfortunate, but, we persevered.
Okay, what about creating the character of Captain Lockley?
Lockley, I needed to get her anchored in the show really fast, so I made her Sheridan's ex. The guy gets around, apparently. And she was a good character. She wasn't as strong as the rest of them because she had no time to really grow and develop. But that's why you need someone as strong as the actress was to really establish a character from day one, given that there was no prior context to work with.
Yeah. In terms of the whole series, were you ready to see it end after that 5 years?
Yes and no. Yeah, I always said early on, 5 years and we're done. We're walking away. This is not a franchise. This is a story told over 5 years. And Bruce hated that. He said, why couldn't it be a 6-year arc? Come on. But I was done with it. But we had created this great operation with some really good, talented people, and they were all going to be out of work because of me. So I thought, well, maybe we should try one other show like in the B5 universe. And that led to Crusade, which was probably one of my greater mistakes for allowing myself to say, well, we should keep this going.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a second. I just want to ask you a few more Babylon 5 questions. Talk a little about the merchandising. Was there a lot of merchandising on the show?
There was some merchandising on Babylon 5, but I wanted it kept minimal. I didn't want that to drive the show. So a lot of things that came along, we just vetoed. Plus things that were ethically questionable. They wanted to Babylon shot glasses, which condone liquor, and I didn't want to do that. We did some novels that were pretty good where I wrote the outlines and then handed them off to other writers.
So they all had your stamp on them?
Yeah, all my stamp on them. Small bits and pieces, but nothing too major. I wanted it to be as free of that as I possibly could. I've seen how merchandising and marketing can take over a show, and from the other side, and I didn't want it to happen to my show, so I was pretty firm on keeping the marketing down to a minimum.
What to you is the greatest thing about having created and produced Babylon 5?
Telling that story. And look, end of the day, I'm a storyteller. If someone came to me tomorrow and said, we're going to make you just a staff writer, lowest position possible, pay you crap money, but you can write whatever you want, I take that in a hot second. I only became a producer out of self-defense because someone would rewrite my script. Well, who did that? Well, the story editor. I want his job. And your story editor get rewritten. Who did that? The producer. I want his job. So I worked my way up out of sheer self-defense. But in B5, as the showrunner, there was no one to rewrite me. I could write whatever I wanted, however obscure I wanted to get, and not to get any creative interference from the studio. Again, after episode 2, year 2, they left us alone. And the opportunity to write whatever you want, see it done by actors who are at the top of their skill, top technical stuff, and tell a saga like that. That changed the way television's done in this country. After us, up came shows like Lost and others that had 5-year arcs. In fact, Damon Lindelof, who was one of the main writers on Lost, said we based the Lost arc on Babylon 5. Battlestar Galactica, same thing. We created that. And to be able to add those tools to the storytelling toolboxes of American writers, and to just tell that story, full measure, without interference, that was the best.
Wow. Would you do it differently today?
I wouldn't do it again. I would go through it again, but wouldn't do it again because it damn near killed me the first time. Yeah, I would do it differently today because I'm not the same writer I was in 1991. I have a different lens now. So it would be a very different flavor to it now.
Would it be darker?
Hard to say. I haven't given it a whole lot of thought. I figured it's done. I moved on. let alone.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Crusade now. In terms of you said that it wasn't the experience that you were hoping for.
When TNT picked up Babylon 5's fifth year, Warner's and they said we want to do a sequel series, and I thought, great, we'll make it about this ship, the Excalibur, and give us another 5-year story that would be much different in nature. And began the process of writing and producing the show. What none of us knew, I only found out later, as Babylon 5 was going forward in its fifth year, TNT commissioned a survey of its audience to determine how they were responding to Babylon 5. And what they discovered was that TNT audience, which is then a lot of westerns and wrestling shows, didn't like science fiction. That when B5 came on, their audience checked out. B5 audience came in. It stuck around for that hour, and they checked out, and the TNT audience came back in again. So they were spending money on a show that wasn't going to add to their audience. So they decided we have to get out of this contract. We have to kill the show. And we do that by making a stink over the fact that it isn't the show that we wanted to order in the first place. So they began giving us notes that became increasingly egregious, hideous, and immoral as we went along. Example being, we had an episode where our captain, played by Gary Cole, outsmarts a bad guy who's come to the ship and foxes him and gets him out of there. Their note was they wanted Gary Cole's character, the captain of our ship, the star of our show, to arrange for one of the female crew members to be raped, catch him, quote, with his pants down around his ankles, unquote, and blackmail him into leaving the ship. I said to them, you want the star of our show to arrange for a member of his crew to be sexually assaulted? Did you think it's more something colorful, rating? But so no. So I would go to hell if I did this. Granted, I'm going anyway, but why accelerate the journey? My exact words. And I kept putting on the brakes, and Warner's couldn't. I said, why are you fighting them? So the things that they're asking me, I can't do. You wanted a character to become a sexual explorer, that when they made contact with an alien race, you could have sex with him. No. And after doing, I think, 13 episodes and fighting them tooth and nail the entire time, it was just awful. They convened a meeting at their offices, and they had a sheaf of notes this thick. And it was me and my other producers and Warner's on one side of the table and all of them on the other side of the table over there. And the head of TNT began to go through the notes. Page 1, I said, no. Women, no to what? No to page 1, no to page 35, all the parts and pieces in between. The answer is no. And she said, well, we want to talk about that. I said, the weather. She said, if you don't do these notes, we're canceling the show. I said, then it's canceled. Simple as that. I never even hesitated. Then it's done. Which is what they wanted, but I didn't know that at the time. And then, of course, they tried to, Warner tried to sell the show to Sci-Fi Channel to pick it up. And Sci-Fi wanted to buy it, and they put an offer on the table. But TNT was terrified that the show would do well somewhere else. So Sci-Fi also wanted the reruns of Babylon 5. And TNT said, great, but we'll charge you 3 times what we paid for them, knowing Sci-Fi could never meet that money, and they were never going to get Crusade. So they killed it in its cradle, and that was the end of the show.
Wow. Did you have it all plotted out the way that you did for Babylon 5?
Yeah, I had a whole 5-year arc, and the way that the show started, where they're looking for a disease that has basically given Earth a few years to live, would become a whole different show. They find the cure in season 2. And then after that, they become renegades. There's something else happens that sets a whole show in a different direction. So I had a whole 5-year arc planned out for that, but never got to do it.
Would you have seen more races, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was more exploratory kind of a show. We actually hired guys from JPL and NASA to work with us to create planetary environments that were authentic. So in terms of the geology, the lighting, we did one show where the planet was near a binary star system. And we brought in guys from NASA to say it would be this color star and this color star, and that'd be over here and over here. We lit the set accordingly. so that when you walk down, you through different colored shadows in different directions. Completely weirded out the crew. It just gave them the screaming willies. It was great. We had planetary geologists who worked with us to see how the strata would look like when they go into caves. So it was really meant to be something special, and it got killed.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Did you want to continue working in television after that?
I did want to keep working in television. The problem was when you're a showrunner, it's hard to get another gig because no one's going to hire you in a second position because they figure you want to do your own thing. And there are only so many shows that are created and bought every year, so there's a very small number of categories where you can get hired. After Crusade, I was brought on to Jeremiah, which was being developed over at Showtime. And they had this property for several years and wasn't going anywhere. And they said, can you help us out? And I wrote a 2-hour pilot based on the project. And they liked it so much they commissioned us to a full season without a pilot script, a pilot movie. They said, well, I love the script, go make the show. And we did our first season based on that script.
What was the premise?
Well, what the premise was depends on who you talk to. Showtime wanted a post-apocalyptic, dark, dirty, gritty, foul-mouthed show about the end of the world. It was depressing and dour and dark. And MGM wanted a post-apocalyptic show that was cute and fuzzy and optimistic and happy and charming and full of fun. And between them, they could never work it out. So we were always being caught in the middle between those two sides. And there were some personnel problems with some of the cast members. So it was just, from day one, a nightmare. Because I knew what the show had to be for story purposes, but MGM was pulling this way, Showtime was pulling that way, the cast members were acting up, and every single day was a nightmare. It was the worst experience I've ever had on any show, bar none. And I was contractually obligated to do 2 years. I did it and ran like hell.
Was there ever a chance that you would just leave the show early?
I couldn't leave early. I was required by contract to be there for 2 years, and I was there.
Okay, so you weren't going to break it, even with...
Hell, not being sued.
Is that the last thing you did for television?
Jeremiah was the last thing I did for television for a long time. I did a couple small, pilot script things here and there, but nothing significant at all. And because I had blown up Crusade, because I had a problem with Universal, with MGM and Showtime, because I had walked off Captain Power and other shows and on and on, it was hard to reinsert myself being perceived as a pain in the ass. There were some who said my career was dead. Out of Jeremiah, I just killed it. And I thought, well, I never accepted that possibility. What can I do now differently? And as time passed, I got busy with other stuff. I thought, movies. I have not written a feature film before, and I think it's probably time to do that. And wrote Changeling, which changed my entire life.
Can you talk about that?
All right. When I was a reporter, I'd heard the story about Christine Collins and the story in which her young son disappeared when the cops brought back what they said was her son, was the wrong boy. They didn't want to acknowledge that. And said that she was insane, put her in an institution. Horrible. I've been aware of the story for some time. I tried to work it as a story before for television. Didn't work out. Well, this could be a good feature. So I took some time, did some more research on it. I came up with a story that worked. I wrote the script, gave the first draft to my agent, who gave it to Ron Howard, who bought it immediately for himself to direct initially, but then he wasn't available. Gave it to Clint Eastwood, who loved it, ran a plane, signed on to direct it. Angelina Jolie signed on to star in it. This happened within a matter of 2 months. And suddenly, within the end of that same year, they were shooting it. And it went from being this momentarily unemployed TV writer to an A-list movie writer almost overnight. And the fun part was going to the studios and meeting guys who said, had no idea of my background at all. And I said, where did you learn to write like this? Well, this is your first movie script? First script at all? No, I've been writing for 20 years. Yeah. And it just changed everything in my life. So then I was, getting huge assignments and massive tons of money. And Clint shot the script as written, didn't change anything. It got Oscar nominations, and I got a British Academy Award nomination for the screenplay. And suddenly I was in this whole other category, and it scared the hell out of me.
Did you miss not actually producing the film?
I never produced motion pictures, so I didn't miss doing it. And I was happy to let others do it and learn from them. I got to watch Clint Eastwood work and learn how to direct a film from him, which is like taking a master's class in production. So having been a producer and carry the burden of that for a lot of years, I thought, you drive for a while. I'm tired of driving for a bit. You go for it for a while. So that was fun. I just write and not worry about the actual process of production.
So what did it open up for you with other projects? After
Changeling, I was offered, I wrote something like 12 different screenplays on assignment, or which I sold. Those that were produced, worked at World War Z, which is coming out shortly. Did Thor, Ninja Assassin, Underworld Awakening. The Ninja Assassin story was just pretty funny because, as I mentioned, the Wachowskis were friends of mine. And I got a call one day from them saying, we need your help. It's on a Monday. We're 6 weeks from camera. The script doesn't work. Can you come up and meet with us? Went to Warner Brothers, sat down with them. And I said, look, the script, isn't what we need it to be. We need to have a new draft done, fade in to fade out, quickly. Can you do this for us? No problem, my friends, when you need it. Well, it has to go out to casting directors on Friday. This was Tuesday. Okay. So I came home, put on a pot of coffee, and spent the next 52 hours writing a whole new movie screenplay. Slept 1 or 2 hours a night, and just got it done. And Warner shot it pretty much as written, which scared the hell out of me. And did reasonably well. First script that was written in 52 hours called Ninja Assassin. And, had 54 hours and had been called Gone with the Wind. It might have been a little different situation, but it was what it was.